Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Suspiria in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, friends. In today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called Suspiria. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you. I'm also going to give you all the information on which OTT platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office, collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we'll discuss about the facts of this film's storyline, star-cast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you, friends, to watch this video till the end, so let's start the video. Suspiria is a 2018 supernatural horror film directed by Luca Guadagnino from a screenplay by David Kajganich, inspired by Dario Argento's 1977 Italian film of the same name. It stars Dakota Johnson as an American woman who enrolls at a prestigious dance academy in Berlin run by a coven of witches. Tilda Swinton co-stars in 3 roles as the company's lead choreographer, as a male psychotherapist involved in the academy, and as the leader of the coven. Mia Goth, Elena Fokina, and Chloe Grace Moretz appear in supporting roles as students, while Angela Winkler, Ingrid Caven, Sylvie Tested, Renee Suitendijk, and Christine Lebout portray some of the Academy's matrons. Jessica Harper, star of the original film, has a cameo appearance. A remake of Suspiria was first announced in 2008 after Guadagnino had acquired the rights from the original film's writers, Argento and Daria Nicolodi. Guadagnino offered the film to David Gordon Green, but that project was eventually canceled due to financing conflicts. In September 2015, Guadagnino confirmed his plans to direct, describing his version as an homage to the original rather than a straightforward remake. A new screenplay was drafted by Kajganich, who had written Guadagnino's A Bigger Splash the year before. Kajganich set the film during the so-called German Autumn of 1977 to explore themes of generational guilt in that country during the Cold War. The film's other themes include motherhood, evil, and the dynamics of matriarchies. Unlike the original film, which used exaggerated colors, Guadagnino conceived the visuals in Suspiria as winterish and bleak, absent of primary colors. The film incorporates stylized dance sequences choreographed by Damien Jallet, which form part of its representation of witchcraft. Principal photography took place in late 2016 and early 2017 in Varese, Italy, and in Berlin. The musical score was composed by Radiohead singer Tom York, who took inspiration from krautrock. The film is dedicated to the memories of Vogue Italia editor-in-chief Franca Sozzani, film director Jonathan Demme, and Deborah Falzoni. Suspiria premiered at the 75th Venice International Film Festival on September 1, 2018. It was given a limited release by Amazon Studios in Los Angeles and New York on October 26, 2018, where it grossed over $180,000 in its opening weekend, marking the highest screen average box office launch of the year. It was screened on October 31st in some U.S. cities before opening in wide release on November 2, 2018. It was released in Italy on January 1, 2019 by Videa. A box office bomb, critical response was polarized. Some praised it for its visual elements and acting, while others criticized its historical political setting as unnecessary or arbitrary in relation to its other themes. Plot. During the German Autumn of 1977, Susie Banyan, an American from a Mennonite family in Ohio, is admitted at the Marcos Dance Academy in West Berlin. The academy is reeling from the disappearance of a student, Patricia Hingel, who vanished after telling her psychotherapist, Josef Klemperer, that the academy is controlled by a coven. Journals left by Patricia in Klemperer's office detail the 3 mothers, a trio of witches who predate Christianity. Mater Suspiriorum, Mater Tenebrarum, and Mater Lacrimarum. Klemperer, initially dismissive of Patricia's claims, becomes suspicious of the academy after her disappearance. During rehearsal, a Soviet student, Olga, becomes indignant towards Madame Blanc and storms out of the studio. Olga attempts to escape with her belongings, but finds herself trapped alone in a room lined with mirrors. Blanc, meanwhile, resumes the rehearsal, during which Susie performs an aggressive dance. Her movements begin physically afflicting Olga, ravaging her body and damaging her organs and bones. Several of the Academy's matrons drag Olga's mangled body away with large hooks. Later, the matrons hold an informal election for who is to serve as the coven's new leader. The vote is between Madame Blanc and Mother Marcos, an aged and grossly disfigured witch who has long controlled the coven and for whom the Academy is named. Marcos wins the popular vote. Afterwards, Miss Griffith, the most sheepish of the matrons, kills herself. Susie befriends her classmate Sarah, where one another investigate the disappearances of Olga and Patricia. Both find out the Academy has washed all traces of them. Susie quickly climbs the ranks as Blanc's protégé, then appointed the lead of the Academy's upcoming piece, Volk. Meanwhile, Sarah grows suspicious of the matrons after a meeting with Klemperer and uncovers clandestine hallways in the building where she discovers esoteric relics. Klemperer attends the performance. Immediately prior, Sarah explores a passageway leading into catacombs where she finds a heavily withering Patricia. Sarah runs away, but the matrons manifest holes in the floor, causing her to fall and fracture her leg. Sarah emerges midway through the performance, dancing her part in a hypnotic trance, but collapses in pain before the dance ends. Blanc subsequently chastises Susie for intervening in the matrons' efforts to manipulate Sarah's body. The next day, Susie attends a celebratory dinner with the matrons. Meanwhile, Klemperer encounters Anki, his presumed deceased wife, at his dacha in East Germany. She tells him she faked her death after fleeing the Nazis and started a new life in England. They walk together, passing through a security checkpoint into West Berlin without being noticed. Klemperer realizes the two have arrived at the Marcos Academy. Before his eyes, he realizes Anki is in fact Miss Huller, one of the matrons, and that he has been lured there to bear witness to an impending witches' Sabbath. After the dinner, Susie returns to the Academy and is led to a chamber where Blanc and the other matrons await with Mother Marcos, whom Susie is to be a new vessel for, and an incapacitated Klemperer. Susie renounces her own mother, who simultaneously succumbs on her deathbed in Ohio. The matrons disembowel Sarah to begin the Sabbath, but Blanc senses a discrepancy. Hesitant to proceed, she is nearly decapitated by Marcos. As Blanc bleeds profusely, Susie reveals that she, not Marcos, is Mother Suspiriorum. She is there to claim the Academy and eradicate Marcos. Susie summons death, killing Marcos and her most faithful matrons, sparing only those devoted to Blanc. Patricia, Olga, and Sarah, each physically ravaged, plead to die, which Susie grants them. The following day, the Academy resumes operations as usual. Miss Vendegast discovers Blanc on the verge of death, and an announcement is made to the students that Blanc has left the Academy. Meanwhile, Klemperer, who was spared and now confined to his bed, is met by Susie at his home. She apologizes for her coven's actions and recounts to him the fate of Anke, who died at the Theresienstadt concentration camp. Upon her touching him, he suffers a violent seizure that erases his memories before she leaves. In the present day, a carving of Klemperer and Anke's initials on the wall of their dacha goes unnoticed by its current occupants. In a post-credits scene, Susie stares approvingly at something outside the Academy. Cast: Dakota Johnson as Susanna Susie Banyan, Mother Suspiriorum; Tilda Swinton as Madame Blanc; Mother Helena Marcos, Dr. Joseph Klemperer, credited as Lutz Ebersdorf for the latter; Mia Goth as Sarah Sims; Angela Winkler as Miss Tanner; Ingrid Caven as Miss Vendegast;
Elena Fokina as Olga Ivanova;
Sylvie Testud as Miss Griffith; Renee Soutendijk as Miss Huller; Christine Lebout as Miss Balfour;
Małgosia Bella as Mrs. Banyan, Death;
Jessica Harper as Anka Meyer; Chloe Grace Moretz as Patricia Pat Hingle; Fabricia Sacchi as Pavla; Jessica Batut as Miss Mandel; Alec Weck as Miss Milius; Vincenza Modica as Miss Marks; Vanda Capriolo as Alberta; Brigitte Cuvelier as Miss Caplet; Gayla Moody as Caroline;
Annalise Bravers as Sonia; Sarah Sgotti as Doll; Hala Turderdottir as Masha;
Olivia Ancona as Marquetta; Clementine Houdard as Miss Budaher; Doris Hick as Frau Sesame; Mikkel Olsen as Agent Glockner; Fred Kellerman as Agent Albrecht. Analysis and themes: motherhood. The theme of motherhood is explored frequently in the film, both within the coven and in Susie's early life and relationship to her own mother. Michael Leader of Sight and Sound considers the film an extended exercise in metafictional annotation that insists on dragging the original's darkest metaphors into the light. Michael O'Sullivan of The Washington Post links the film's theme of motherhood characterized alongside its discontents as being chewed on like a vulture tearing at a carrion with ethnic nationalism, though he states that neither subtext goes much of anywhere. Julie Bloom echoed similar sentiments in the New York Times, writing that while the film revels in gore and gruesome displays of horror, it also delves into the dynamics of a wholly female community, touching on issues of power, manipulation, motherhood, and the horrible things some women can do to other women and themselves. Matt Goldberg of Collider interprets a perfidious form of motherhood as a core theme of the film, as he notes the matrons merely pretend to be motherly towards the students, but they're actually just using them for their power. Madame Blanc's near decapitation at the hands of Mother Marcos, when she is resistant to beginning the Sabbath, demonstrates that Blanc and Marcos do not share the same values, and that Blanc has formed a genuine kinship with Susie. Hannah Ewens of Vice notes, "With Caven power transferred to Susie, it's impossible to say where her talent ends and the influence of the mothers begins. Mothers aren't supposed to have favorites, but deep down they often do, and Madame Blanc's is Susie from the moment of her audition." Abuse of power and national guilt. For the majority of the film, Susie appears to be an otherwise normal woman who finds her natural talents rewarded and prized by the Caven. As the film progresses into its final act, however, it is revealed that Susie is in fact Mother Suspiriorum, one of the three mothers whom the Caven exalts. Film crit Hulk, a pseudonymous writer for the New York Observer, interprets Susie's character arc as the discovery of her shadow self. Initially, she seems just a fresh-faced girl from Ohio, eager to make strides into this esteemed dance company. But her shadow self is soon awoken, which we are meant to fear. Susie unleashes her libido as the rapturous demon below claws at the floor. She turns deeply sexual, almost becoming carnal as she writhes to the ground. Similarly to Goldberg, they interpret Susie's unveiling of herself as Mother Suspiriorum to be messianic in nature, as she eradicates the corrupted Mother Marcos and the loyal followers who idolize her. Goldberg reads Susie's destruction of Marcos and her followers as retribution for their abuse of power. Guadagnino is repeatedly hitting on a world where power has been abused, and those who feel no guilt or shame are running rampant. We see it in Klemperer's history as a Holocaust survivor. We see it in the current events that pop up in the news during the movie, and we see it inside the Caven, where the older women who are supposed to be teaching and helping the students are instead preying on them. The movie isn't saying that powerful women are bad. It's saying that anyone who abuses their power to their own ends rather than serving others is perverting that power. While Susie Mother Suspiriorum shows no mercy for Marcos and her followers, Goldberg asserts that she is capable of compassion, citing the fact that she grants the physically devastated Sarah, Olga, and Patricia the sweet release of a gentle death rather than obliterating them. Goldberg extends this interpretation to Susie Mother Suspiriorum's visit to Klemperer in the epilogue, during which she relates his lost wife's death in a concentration camp, information he had not previously known. Goldberg reads the sequence as an emphasis that women bonding together have the power to remove the fear of death, and that while the world, especially the powerful, need guilt and shame, Klemperer should not feel those things because he has not abused his power. He's the witness, and from the perspective of witnessing an authoritarian rise to power, in his case, Nazi Germany, he is responsible for watching and doing nothing. However, it's people in power who need guilt and shame. Some critics have alternately interpreted the representation of the Caven's power as inspiring fear of women's autonomy and linking it solely with violence. Sonia Rao of the Washington Post that while Guadagnino grants these women power, their power knows no bounds. Madame Blanc can turn Susie's dreams into blood-curdling nightmares. She and the other matrons can inflict injuries on dancers whenever and wherever they want. The witches frequently inflict or inspire violence. Their actions, after all, are what make this a horror movie. But some critics say this makes it seem like a woman with a great amount of power is someone who should be feared. The Chicago Reader's Andrea Thompson echoes this sentiment, writing that the film adopts a vision where when women are united, it is always to achieve an evil outcome. Andrew Whalen of Newsweek conversely suggests that the film decimates typical narrative conventions of good and bad. Evil is disturbingly natural in Suspiria, where sometimes only further violence can make room for good to exist at all. Whalen characterizes the Coven as a working alternative to the patriarchy falling apart outside the doors, financially autonomous beyond the reach of the police, and deeply powerfully collectivist both materially and spiritually. The narrative of the Coven and Susie Mother Suspiriorum's infiltration of it is underpinned by numerous historical incidents, including the hijacking of Lufthansa Flight 181, bombings, and numerous kidnappings perpetrated by the Red Army faction, a Marxist group whose peak activity occurred in the autumn of 1977 in West Germany. These events occurred in the wake of Vergangenheitsbewältigung, a period referring to Germany's national reflection on their culpability in World War II and the Holocaust, which echoes constantly throughout the film. While Goldberg has pointed out correlations between the Coven's inner workings and the national events occurring outside of it, others, such as Simon Abrams of The Hollywood Reporter, view them as surface-level parallels between historic signifiers that have the odd effect of subordinating those female-centered themes to a blandly familiar grab bag of sensationalistic headlines. Abrams concludes that the film offers an underdeveloped pseudo-Jungian understanding of how historical events sorta overshadow their protagonists' lives. Production development. A remake of Suspiria, 1977, was announced in 2008 by director David Gordon Green, who had co-written a script with his sound designer. In 2007, Luca Guadagnino had convinced the original film's creators Dario Argento and Daria Nicolodi to allow him to option a remake of the film. Guadagnino subsequently offered the project to Green, who cast Isabel Huppert, Janet McTeer, and Isabel Fuhrman. Green described his screenplay as operatic, adding, "I love Argento's film, and we wrote a very faithful, extremely elegant opera. I don't mean musical opera, but it would be incredibly heightened music, and heightened and very operatic and elegant sets." According to Green, financing conflicts resulted in the project being scrapped. In September 2015, at the 72nd Venice Film Festival, Guadagnino announced plans to direct a remake of Suspiria with the four main actors of his film A Bigger Splash, which had premiered at the festival. Guadagnino revealed that his version was to be set in Berlin circa 1977, and would have as its main theme the uncompromising force of motherhood. Guadagnino has since said explicitly that the film is not a remake, but is instead a homage to the powerful emotion he felt when he first watched the original film. "I was so terrified, but as always, with something that terrifies you, I was completely pulled in. I think the process of how that movie influenced my psyche probably has yet to stop, which is something that happens often when you bump into a serious work of art like Suspiria. I think the movie I made, in a way, represents some of the layers of my upbringing, watching the movie for the first time and thinking of it and being obsessed by it." Guadagnino said in 2018 that he felt Suspiria was his most personal film to date. The film was a co-production between the United States and Italy. The screenplay was written by American writer David Kajganich, who had previously written Guadagnino's A Bigger Splash. Though Kajganich admitted to not being a fan of the original film, he agreed to write a screenplay for Guadagnino. On writing the film, Kajganich stated, "Horror often loses me when it starts to no longer regard real people in a real world." And so, I said to Luca when he asked me would I ever be interested in joining him in this, I did say I will take quite a practical approach if you're okay with that. I would want to know how something like this could happen, how it would work, what the hierarchy of the Coven would be, all of those practical questions that normally aren't maybe of interest to a typical horror film, whatever that is, and he was all for it. And so I did quite a lot of research into actual witchcraft and covens, and we did quite a lot of research into the period that it's set in. What was going on in feminist politics and feminist art then, and how were concerns being exploited from the inside out, and how that might look inside of the context of the occult. And so, we did try to ground it and how real people in these fantastical situations might behave. Kajganich chose to set the film in Berlin in 1977, the year the original film was released, during the series of terrorist events known as the German Autumn. The film begins shortly after the hijacking of Lufthansa Flight 181 in order to hint at larger thematic concerns, specifically the response of the youth of the era to the denial by their parents' and grandparents' generations of German culpability in World War II. Kajganich used the political tumult of the time as a means of contextualizing the central plot surrounding the Marcos Dance Academy, where an American is getting her education in a way in how a modern kind of fascism might look. For inspiration, Kajganich studied women's literature of the period, as well as the films of German contemporary filmmaker Rainer Werner Fassbinder, and listened to a lot of German singer Nico. Guadagnino was mostly interested in the witchcraft and solidarity among women aspects of Kajganich's script, themes which he said have been perverted by the official history and the official religions as making a bargain with the devil. The witchcraft that I'm interested in also has a lot to do with what, psychoanalytically, is called the concept of the terrible mother, which you can see also in some religions, particularly in the Kali goddess. Retaining the Dance Academy locale, Kajganich proposed that the witches would transmit their spells via movement. It makes total sense why a coven would hide in a dance company, because they could wield their influence in public ways without the public realizing. Kajganich pitched this concept to Guadagnino early on and shaped the screenplay using dance as a narrative through line. Guadagnino was also enthusiastic in response to Kajganich's setting of the film, remarking, "Dario's movie was a sort of self-contained box of fleshy delicacies, which was not in relationship with the moment it was made. It was too much of an opportunity for me and David to actually say, it's 1977. Deal with it. Let's make it the center of the story." Casting. On November 23, 2015, Guadagnino that Tilda Swinton and Dakota Johnson had been cast in the film and that shooting was scheduled to begin in August 2016 with release set for 2017. Johnson was asked to play the part of Susie Bannion while filming Guadagnino's A Bigger Splash. After watching the original film, Johnson agreed to commit to the project. "I was obviously really invested in Luca as a person, collaborator, artist," Johnson said. "You just want to go on any adventure with him." Swinton, a friend and frequent collaborator of Guadagnino who had also co-starred in A Bigger Splash, was cast in 3 roles. Madame Blanc, the lead choreographer of the Academy, Helena Marcos, its decrepit matron, and Dr. Josef Klemperer, a psychologist who becomes embroiled in the coven. In the part of Klemperer, Swinton is credited as Lutz Ebersdorf. Swinton stated that she modeled her portrayal of Madame Blanc after Martha Graham and Pina Bausch, who she felt embodied the shape Madame Blanc cuts, her silhouette, her barefoot rootedness, the precise choreography of her relationship with cigarette after cigarette. In October 2016, Chloe Grace Moretz was cast as Patricia Hingle, a student who goes missing from the Academy, while Mia Goth was cast as Sarah, another one of the Academy's dancers. Moretz commented on her participation in the film, "It's unlike any other directing process I have ever been a part of. Luca is Luca, and there's kind of no mistaking it for anything else. He'll let you do the craziest stuff on screen and won't bat an eye. He'll tell you to go farther." Also cast were European actresses Sylvie Testud, Angela Winkler, Fabrizia Sacchi, and Renee Soutendijk, each as matrons of the Academy. Fashion models Małgosia Bella and Alec Weck appear in their feature film debuts as Susie's mother and another of the Academy matrons, respectively. Jessica Harper, who played Susie Bannion in the original film, also joined the cast as Ankie Meyer, the wife of Klemperer, who disappeared during the Nazi invasion. Harper was asked to appear in the cameo by Guadagnino, but under the provision that she would be able to perform in German. To prepare, she took German classes at a Berlitz school. Lutz Ebersdorf. The role of Dr. Josef Klemperer is portrayed by Swinton, although it is credited as played by an actor named Lutz Ebersdorf in the film and its promotional material, and the filmmakers maintained that Ebersdorf was a real psychoanalyst until a month after the film's premiere. In March 2017, photographs of a seemingly old man spotted on the film's set were published online, identifying the man as Swinton in heavy prosthetic makeup. In February 2018, Guadagnino called the claim complete fake news, saying that the man was not Swinton, but in fact a German actor named Lutz Ebersdorf in his screen debut, who plays a psychoanalyst named Josef Klemperer in the film and is a psychoanalyst himself. IndieWire questioned the veracity of Guadagnino's statement because of Ebersdorf's suspicious IMDb profile and otherwise lack of online presence. The film's casting director and executive producer Stella Savino responded to IndieWire, saying, "The character of Dr. Klemperer has been played by Professor Lutz Ebersdorf, a psychoanalyst and not at all a professional actor." During a press conference following the film's September 1, 2018 premiere at Venice, Swinton read a letter purportedly written from Ebersdorf in lieu of his presence, which read, "I am a private individual who prefers to remain private. Though I strongly suspect Suspiria will be the only film I ever appear in, I like the work, and I do not mind getting up very early." Writing for Vanity Fair, Joanna Robinson reported that when the film screened at Fantastic Fest in Austin, Texas, on September 23, 2018, the audience was certain that the role of Klemperer was played by Swinton. Robinson speculated that the filmmakers wrote the role and cast Swinton in order for the film to have both an outsider's perspective and a narrative of female power. By September 2018, IMDb had deleted Ebersdorf's profile and credited Swinton as playing Klemperer under the alias Lutz Ebersdorf. In October 2018, Swinton told the New York Times that Dr. Klemperer was played by Lutz Ebersdorf and Ebersdorf was played by her. When asked why she played Ebersdorf, she said, "For the sheer sake of fun above all. The intention was never to fool anybody. The genius of makeup artist Marc Coulier notwithstanding, it was always our design that there would be something unresolved about the identity of the performance of Klemperer." Swinton asked the makeup department to make a prosthetic penis, which she wore during filming. Swinton wrote Ebersdorf's IMDb biography herself. Guadagnino stated in a subsequent interview in Vulture that several of the actors in the film believed Ebersdorf to be a real person, specifically Ingrid Caven, who was unaware it was Swinton in disguise until after filming wrapped. Filming, locations, and design. While some filming took place at the Palazzo Estense in December 2016, the central shooting location was the Grand Hotel Campo dei Fiori in Varese, Italy, which served as the Marcos Dance Academy. In the film, the hotel appears to be positioned in West Berlin along the Berlin Wall, but the actual location of the building is on a remote mountaintop overlooking Varese. Inbal Weinberg, the film's production designer, commented, "When we arrived in Italy, we went to scout for alternative places because this was logistically going to be almost a nightmare. The hotel had so much going for it." Weinberg dressed the Grand Hotel Campo dei Fiori's interiors with dressings and furniture from various decades to give it an intentionally out-of-time feeling. German Bauhaus geometric designs were used for certain interiors, such as the carpets of Madame Blanc's apartment, while modernist architecture served as a constant reference point. The Frankfurt kitchen, a mass-produced fitted kitchen introduced in 1926, was the basis for the matron's kitchen design, as well as the Sonneveld house in Rotterdam. In designing the dancers' dormitories, Weinberg dressed them with posters from contemporaneous underground bands and plasticky furnishings from the 1970s. Costume designer Giulia Piersanti selected vintage clothing from the period that was colorful but not necessarily bright. Many of the costumes in the film were purchased from a used clothing warehouse in Prato, Italy. For the film's climactic Sabbath scene, the production used a loggia in the hotel, filling in its arches, which were then meticulously covered with braided hair. "It was Luca's idea to use hair," said Weinberg. "We conceptually decided that the texture of the wall is the hair of victims." The process of weaving the artificial hair took the design crew weeks to complete. Principal photography. Principal photography began at the Grand Hotel Campo dei Fiori in Varese on October 31, 2016, with a production budget of $20 million. The shoot lasted approximately 2 months, concluding in December 2016, while the remainder of principal photography was finished in early 2017, concluding in Berlin on March 10, 2017. Approximately 2 weeks were spent in Berlin, during which filming of the street and U-Bahn sequences took place, as well as those occurring at the police station, which was shot in an abandoned office building in Mitte. The scenes of Klemperer at his dacha were shot in suburban Berlin. The filming conditions at the Grand Hotel Campo dei Fiori were described as uncomfortable by the cast and crew, as the film was shot in the winter months and the hotel was inefficiently heated with gasoline space heaters. The hotel, which had been abandoned for several decades, had been adorned with cellular towers on the rooftop. Guadagnino recalled a constant signal coming from the antennas that made all of us very weak and tired. While Johnson stated, there was electricity pulsating through the building, and everyone was shocking each other. She retrospectively commented that the filming process fucked me up so much that I had to go to therapy. She later expanded on this statement, saying that the filming process was not traumatic, and instead the most fun and the most exhilarating and the most joyful that it could be. When you're working sometimes with dark subject matter, it can stay with you, and then to talk to somebody really nice about it afterwards is a really nice way to move on from the project. Harper, who worked on the film for only several days but was present during portions of the shoot, likened the locale to a haunted house. It was cold and dark and scary, which was kind of appropriate, but not ideal shooting circumstances. The production's first assistant director broke his leg early into the shoot after falling on one of the sets. Cinematography. Like its predecessor, Suspiria was shot on 35mm film stock. Cinematographer Sayambu Mukdipram, who had previously worked on Guadagnino's Call Me By Your Name, 2017, shot the film exclusively on Kodak Vision 3500T 52119 without correction filters. To achieve a 1970s-style effect, the film uses slow motion and numerous camera zooms typical of the period, including recurrent use of snap zooms. In contrast to the original, Guadagnino's film uses primary colors sparingly. He described the film's look as winterish, evil, and really dark. According to Guadagnino, the decision not to use primary colors was made in accordance with the film's bleak setting amidst Germany on the verge of a civil war. Rather than using lavish color like Argento did in his original film, Guadagnino stated he and Mukdipram went for a different take. Dario Argento, and let's face it, Luciano Tovoli, his wonderful DP, they decided to go for an extremely expressionistic way of decoding horror, which started from the work of Mario Bava. The way in which they made those colors, not just simple gels in front of lights, they were using velvet, and they were really sculpting the light. That has influenced filmmakers for so long. I think everything that could have been said through that style has been said. In opting for a more muted color palette, the filmmakers used cinematographer Michael Ballhaus's work in the films of Rainer Fassbinder as reference points, as well as the work of modernist artist Balthus, which Guadagnino felt created such uncanny eeriness and fear. The compositions, costumes, and set design were all crafted with this in mind and prominently feature browns, blacks, blues, and greens. Special effects makeup artist Marc Coulier served as the film's makeup effects coordinator. The bulk of the special effects featured in the film were achieved via practical methods. According to Coulier, the death sequence of Olga and the final Sabbath scene were the most demanding in regard to special effects. For the former, a prosthetic arm, leg, broken ribs, and a protruding dental cast were created for actress Elena Fokina, Olga, allowing her to appear as though the bones in her limbs, abdomen, and jaw were being crushed and broken. Fokina, a professional dancer and contortionist, achieved the majority of the contortions herself, while her actual arm and leg were removed from the footage in post-production via digital processing. In conceiving Olga's broken arm, Coulier was inspired by a stunt performed by Ronnie Cox in Deliverance, 1972, in which he dislocated his own shoulder in the film. The witch's Sabbath that serves as the climax of the film was technically complicated due to Swinton's portrayal of 3 roles, each of which required their own unique and extensive makeup effects, as well as full-body prosthetics. Additional prosthetics were created to achieve the disfigured appearance of Patricia, as well as the disembowelment of Sarah, 70. We had so many other makeup effects and full-body prosthetics going on, Coulier recalled. We had Chloe Moretz in her dead Patricia makeup. We had the intestines being pulled out. We had all sorts of stuff. It was a big challenge, and we had about 20 people on set, all applying makeups for that long sequence. The wound, which Susie tears open on her chest in the climax, was also achieved with prosthetics, though it was digitally enhanced in post-production. Choreography. Unlike the original film, which, though set at a ballet academy, featured very little on-screen dancing, Guadagnino's Suspiria uses dance as a key plot device. Congruous to the period in which it is set, contemporary dance was a central influence on the dance style depicted in the film. Kajganich commented that German expressionist dancers Mary Wigman and Pina Bausch were specific influences on his conceptualization of the dance routines. While writing the screenplay, Kajganich shadowed choreographer and dancer Sasha Waltz to gain further insight into the technicalities of the profession. The work of Isadora Duncan was also an influence. Damien Jallet choreographed the elaborate dance sequences in the film. Guadagnino hired him after seeing a live performance of Jallet's Les Méduses, transil The Bewitched, at the Louvre. Incidentally, Jallet had drawn inspiration from Argento's Suspiria when choreographing Les Méduses. Jallet subsequently used Les Méduses as the basis for the film's 6-minute climactic dance sequence called Volk. For the last Sabbath scene, Jallet said, "We wanted to go from something pretty technical, mathematical, with a certain sense of elegance, to something where the body becomes wilder and more distorted," Jallet commented. "The scene describes something very chaotic, but I felt we needed to create something still very ritualized." Indonesian dance also served as a reference point for the sequence, which features movements that are staccato, with harsh stops and starts, and an arm styling that is both intimate, in moments when the dancers hold on to each other, and harshly linear. Aside from Johnson and Goth, all of the actresses in the on-screen dance scenes were professional dancers. Johnson trained extensively in the year leading up to the shoot to achieve the body type and technique of a dancer, spending 2 hours each day training at a dance studio in Vancouver while filming 50 Shades Freed, 2018. She trained in various forms of dance ranging from ballet to contemporary dance, as her character is that of a formally untrained, yet broadly proficient dancer. Johnson also studied the work of Wigman and listened to various musical acts of the 1970s, such as The Carpenters, Jefferson Airplane, and Nina Simone, artists she felt would have informed her character's instinctive movements. In the early autumn of 2016, roughly 2 months before the shoot began, both Johnson and Goth began rehearsing the film's choreography on location in Varese for 6 to 8 hours per day. Music Radiohead singer Tom York composed the score, his first feature film soundtrack. It features the London Contemporary Orchestra and Choir and York's son Noah on drums. He initially refused the offer, but accepted after months of requests from Guadagnino. Much of the score was completed prior to the film shoot, giving Guadagnino the opportunity to play it on set during filming. York cited inspiration from the 1982 Blade Runner soundtrack. Musique concrète artists such as Pierre Henry, modern electronic artists such as James Holden, and music from the film's 1977 Berlin setting such as Krautrock. He said, "There's a way of repeating in music that can hypnotize. I kept thinking to myself that it's a form of making spells. So when I was working in my studio, I was making spells. I know it sounds really stupid, but that's how I was thinking about it." The soundtrack was released on October 26, 2018 by XL Recordings. Release in promotion for the film, a scene was screened during a luncheon at the 2018 CinemaCon in Las Vegas, Nevada in April 2018. It was reported that the footage was so intense it traumatized those present. The scene presented was that in which Olga is contorted and mangled via movements made during Susie's improvisational dance. Peter Soretta of /Film described the scene as very gruesome and hard to watch. This film will make most people feel uneasy. In May 2018, Videa acquired Italian distribution rights to the film. Suspiria held its world premiere at the 75th Venice International Film Festival on September 1, 2018. It opened in a limited release in Los Angeles and New York on October 26, 2018. Guadagnino held an exclusive Q&A session during the film's opening weekend in Los Angeles. Limited screenings began on Halloween night in various U.S. cities, including Dallas, Denver, Portland, San Francisco, Seattle, Springfield, and Tempe. The U.S. release expanded to a total of 311 screens on November 2, 2018. It was released in the United Kingdom by Mubi on November 16, 2018. It was released in Italy on January 1st, 2019. Home media. Suspiria was released in the United States on digital platforms on January 15, 2019, and on Blu-ray on January 29th through Lionsgate. The digital and Blu-ray releases include 3 behind-the-scenes featurettes. As of July 2019, the film has made $1.1 million in Blu-ray sales. Reception office. Suspiria grossed a total of $179,806 during its opening weekend, playing at the ArcLight Hollywood and Regal Union Square in Los Angeles and New York, respectively. This marked an average of $89,903 per screen, the highest screen average box office launch of the year. Upon its expansion the following week, the film grossed $964,722 between November 2nd and November 4th, ranking number 19 at the U.S. box office. The film had closed on December 20th after it grossed $5,169,133 internationally and $2,483,472 in the United States, making for a worldwide gross of $7,053,305. In 2020, Guadagnino said Suspiria had made absolutely nothing. It was a disaster at the box office. Critical response. The critical responses to Suspiria were strongly polarized upon its release. Peter Travers of Rolling Stone stressed that polarizing served as too tame a word to describe the reactions to the film. On review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 66% based on 337 reviews, with an average rating of 6.910. The website's critical consensus reads, Suspiria attacks heady themes with garish vigor, offering a viewing experience that's daringly confrontational and definitely not for everyone. On Metacritic, the film has an average weighted score of 64 out of 100, based on 56 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. Commenting on the horror elements of the film, Andrew Whalen of Newsweek deemed it a powerful and dread-inducing experience even before it reveals itself to be not just an arthouse exploration of a horror aesthetic. He also compared the body horror in the film to that of the works of David Cronenberg. Like Whalen, Kristen Kim of The Nation observed similar elements and wrote that it took the body horror of the original to an unsightly new level. If the blood runs pretty in the old Suspiria, it's urine here that trickles down the legs of a painfully contorted ballerina. Writing in Variety, Owen Gleiberman compared certain visual elements of the film to The Exorcist, 1973, and summarized it as a gory but imperiously lofty matriarchal horror film, though he noted that the film would have benefited from more shocks. The Boston Globe's Ty Burr described the film's finale as Lovecraftian, but concluded that what it mostly leaves behind is an acrid taste of having experienced something stylish but unfulfilling. The Los Angeles Times' Justin Chang felt that the reimagining of witchcraft is boldly absurd and concluded, by the time the phantasmagorical finale arrives, you are flooded with blood and viscera, yes, but also something even more unsettling, a sudden onrush of feeling, a deep, overpowering melancholy. It's the most startling of the movie's transfigurations, and it returns us to the primordial theme of motherhood. Anthony Lane of The New Yorker wrote a favorable review of the film, concluding, The first time I saw Guadagnino's Suspiria, I came out pretty much covered in gore and confounded by the surfeit of stories. Can a splash be so big that it drowns the senses? How does such a film cohere? The second time around, I followed the flow and found that what it led to was not terror or disgust, but an unexpected sadness. David Ehrlich, who gave the film an A-, commented in IndieWire that Suspiria is a film of rare and unfettered madness, and it leaves behind a scalding message that's written in pain and blood. The future will be a nightmare if we can't take responsibility for the past. Slant Magazine's Greg Quick praised the cinematography, but expressed disappointment for what he felt was a lack of cohesion. Suspiria is a largely befuddling accumulation of shots and sounds that never coalesce. Commenting on the performances of the cast, Kim Selling and Jewel Zellman of The Stranger praised that of Swinton, but deemed Johnson miscast in the role of Susie, while Chang noted Swinton's performance as one of her more restrained. Michael O'Sullivan of The Washington Post alternately considered Swinton's performance a tour de force. 6. Klimek praised the performances of all involved, while Ehrlich found Johnson's performance thrillingly unrepentant. Truitt noted that Johnson navigates her role with grace and captures just the right physicality in the various modern dances that ground the movie with a primordial weight and sexual energy. Sandy Schaefer of Screen Rant described Johnson's performance as engaging and Goth as equally strong. The film's elaborate dance sequences were largely praised by critics. Gleiberman praised the dances, writing that they have so much snap and thrust and rhythm, you might call it an art-conscious cousin of the pop choreography of Bob Fosse. The movement is even more jutting and explosive, but it erupts from the women's souls. The New York Times stated in an article about the film's choreography, finally, a film that gets dance right, while BBC reviewer Nicholas Barber says, the company's choreography is woven into the story. It's all deeply impressive. Alonso Duralde of The Wrap, however, negatively compared them to the dance sequences in Showgirls, 1995, and Lost Horizon, 1973, deeming the sequences unintentionally hilarious pieces of choreography. The ludicrous terpsichorean display isn't helped by the costuming. The dancers all wear bright red ropes, tied in what appear to be Japanese shibari bondage knots. Burr alternately praised the choreography, describing it as propulsive and ripe with the sight and sounds of exploding body parts. Argento panned the film, stating that it did not excite me, it betrayed the spirit of the original film, there is no fear, there is no music, the film me, but he did call the film's design beautiful. Lawsuit. On September 27, 2018, it was reported that the film's American distributor, Amazon Studios, was being sued for copyright infringement by the estate of artist Ana Mendieta. The suit, filed in a federal court in Seattle, Washington, alleged that 2 images present in the film's teaser trailer were plagiarized from Mendieta's work. The first is an image of a woman's hands bound with rope on a white table, allegedly derived from Mendieta's untitled rape scene, and the other is the red silhouette of a body imprinted on a bed sheet, which was claimed to have been derived from her Silhouetta series. A cease and desist letter had been delivered to Amazon in July over the images, and they were not included in the subsequent theatrical trailer released the following month. According to the suit, both images had been excised from the film, but an alleged 8 others bore notable similarities to other works by Mendieta. On October 24, 2018, 2 days before the film's U.S. release, it was reported that Amazon Studios and the Mendieta estate had reached an undisclosed settlement. Proposed sequel. Suspiria had the working title of Suspiria Part 1, with Guadagnino and Kajganich conceiving it as the first half of a bigger story. They planned Part 2 to explore the origins of Madame Blanc and Helena Marcos and the future of Susie Bannion. The subtitle was dropped so that Suspiria would be thought of as a standalone work. Guadagnino said he would be interested in developing Part 2 if the film were a commercial success. He expressed interest in making a prequel about Marcos, set hundreds of years before the first film, saying, I have this image in my mind of Helena Marcos in solitude in the year 1212 in Scotland or in Spain, wandering through a village and trying to find a way on how she can manipulate the women of the village. I know she was there. I know it was 600 to 700 years before the actual storyline of this film. In 2020, Guadagnino said a sequel was impossible, as Suspiria had been a disaster at the box office. Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria isn't so much a remake of the 1977 Dario Argento horror classic, as it is a seriously insane and seriously serious expansion on the original. The 2 films share a setting, a few character names, and a basic premise that a prestigious German dance academy is a front for a witches' coven, because of course it is, and that's about it. So if you love Argento's lush and lurid giallo phantasmagoria, you might wonder what exactly is happening here, or rather when. Guadagnino creates an unsettling mood off the top, with a soaked and sallow young dancer dashing into her shrink's office, spewing paranoid babble. And the score from Radiohead genius Tom York creates an inescapable feeling of melancholy and mystery. His haunting three-quarter-time piano theme, titled Suspirium, plays over images of a woman's body being lovingly cleansed as she lies in her sickbed. But Guadagnino takes his time in exploring the cruel contours of this place, an Escher painting of stone stairways and dark halls where pained sighs linger and wicked laughter echoes. For a while, Dakota Johnson's long red braid is the film's primary source of color. It will all explode into a blood-red orgy eventually, but for a long time, we are fully ensconced in the chilly discomfort of perpetually rainy 1977 Berlin. Suspiria is as striking and severe as the director's Call Me By Your Name, the best film of 2017, was warm and welcoming. He could have shocked you quickly with cheap scares. Instead, he's in it for the long haul, insidiously working his way under your skin to disturb you deeply. And for the most part, he succeeds, even as he frustratingly undermines himself with an overstuffed script from David Kajganich, who also wrote the screenplay for Guadagnino's A Bigger Splash. The problem is that while Suspiria has a vivid and specific sense of place, it also strives to exist in the outside world with a larger historical context in a way that never connects. The film aims to say something about the futility of trying to escape the past, despite fervent efforts at rebirth. The fact that Suspiria boasts a powerful, predominantly female cast, led by Johnson, Mia Goth, Angela Winkler, Ingrid Caven, and multiple Tilda Swintons, certainly speaks to the formidable nature of feminine strength. But just as he's building a steady, suspenseful momentum, Guadagnino too often cuts away to the tumult encompassing all of Berlin, a city split in two, struggling to reestablish itself post-Nazism, but still being torn apart by attacks from the leftist Baader-Meinhof group. That feels like an entirely different film, one that blends ambitiously yet awkwardly with the story at the stylishly rotting core of Suspiria. Into this dark world enters sweet Susie. Johnson uses her light, girlish voice, which carries hints of her mother, Melanie Griffiths, to her advantage in the film's early scenes as a shy but ambitious new student at the Helena Marcos Dance Company. It would be easy to underestimate Johnson based on her starring role in the 50 Shades trilogy, but she is an actress of understated, unexpected power who continues to display her versatility. Susie had dreamed of studying there since she was a child, growing up in a religiously conservative family on an Ohio farm. Now that she's arrived, she wastes little time in impressing the school's legendary choreographer, Swinton's swan-like but stern Madame Blanc. Swinton, Guadagnino's longtime friend and muse, is a steely force of nature and fascinating to watch, as always. Shooting in 35mm, Guadagnino uses 70s-style zooms and off-kilter camera angles early on to create a feeling of unease and imbalance. Susie and Blanc are forming a connection, and it might not necessarily be for the good. This is most powerfully clear in the film's tour de force scene, when Susie volunteers to dance the lead role in the company's signature piece after having spent only a couple of days there. As she stomps, crawls, leaps, and twists to Blanc's modern moves, another dancer, trapped in a rehearsal space one floor below, finds herself being yanked violently around the mirrored room, her body contorted in excruciating ways that match the choreography upstairs. She is the world's most flexible voodoo doll, and it is horrifying. Guadagnino and his longtime editor, Walter Fasano, cross-cut seamlessly and thrillingly between both rooms as the dancers build to their respective crescendos. By the end, both are spent, but in vastly different ways. Guadagnino's technical brilliance also is on display in a gorgeous and fluid sequence in the school's dining room and kitchen. His camera panning around over and over as they fill up with food and instructors chatting, eating, milling about. One of the rare sources of humor in this bleak realm is the way in which the chain-smoking, hard-partying teachers interact with each other, their sadistic cackles filling the halls and fueling their fiendish deeds. They're having so much fun you almost want to join them, and they're hoping that Susie, the pure vessel they've long sought, will do just that. But two people who suspect strange things are afoot within the dance company begin investigating at their own peril. One is vivacious fellow dancer Sarah, Goth, the first person to befriend Susie and the first to recognize the transformation she's undergoing. The other is the aforementioned psychiatrist from the film's start, Dr. Josef Klemperer. He's officially credited as being played by Lutz Ebersdorf, but is actually Swinton, again, beneath layers of convincing and detailed old man makeup. Why? For the hell of it, but the performance is consistent with the shape-shifting Swinton's penchant for toying with traditional gender roles, and it provides some genuine moments of pathos. Never mind the well-intentioned doctor's involvement, though. Men are essentially useless in the world of Suspiria. They exist to be mocked and manipulated. Female energy is all that matters, and it is overwhelming in the film's truly gonzo finale. You will stagger out of the theater wondering what exactly you just saw, but you will not easily forget it. But maybe that's Guadagnino's point in incorporating outside troubles into this intense, insular tale. Men got us into the problems that plague the world. Women can get us out, but that liberation comes at a cost. I know this isn't cool and perhaps pointless to say, but I wish a woman had remade Suspiria. Let me unpack that. 1. I wish a woman had been empowered and or inspired to take a crack at Dario Argento's iconic but deeply flawed witch tale. But I love Luca Guadagnino's grotesque political, radically feminist, we'll get to that later, interpretation. And it's not at all accurate to say that I wish the job had gone to another filmmaker. And so, too, I wish that more female filmmakers were making this kind of work at this level, tales that go beyond simple empowerment and voice-giving and live in the chaotic, ambiguous, messy, and biological realm that should be the antithesis of patriarchal cinema. Suspiria had me thinking more than a few times of Paul Verhoeven's Elle, one of the best, most psychologically complex and uncompromising films about sexual assault in recent years, another film by a man. As with Verhoeven's film, none of what Suspiria arrives at is comfortable, and I wish there were more stories about women by women that were emboldened to be this unsettling. What Luca does, and frankly what Suspiria deserves, is to turn the tale of a coven of witches who lord over an unholy dance academy in Berlin inside out. What was a pretty goal-oriented game of escape thee of old crones becomes something more impressionistic about the absurd violence of being a woman. Just as in the original, it begins with Susie Banion's, Dakota Johnson, auspicious arrival at the Marcos Dance Academy and the unraveling of Patricia Hingle, Chloe Grace Moretz. But screenwriter David Kajganich digs deeper into almost every aspect of Argento's original, particularly Susie's American origins and the setting of Berlin during the German autumn of 1977 when the Baader-Meinhof group was perpetrating terrorist acts all over the city. The mess of divided Berlin and the horrors of the Third Reich haunt the school, ruled over by artistic director Madame Blanc, Tilda Swinton, and the seldom-seen Grand Dame Helena Marcos. Their institution could be seen as a kind of counterbalance, a fortress against the ugliness that Berlin has seen, a beacon of hope through art and expression and physical integrity. But it's clear from the outset that a deeper violence lives in its walls, and it's driven Patricia mad, confiding in her analyst Dr. Josef Klemperer, Lutz Ebersdorf, but quite obviously Swinton under layers of convincing prosthetics. The elderly Josef spends much of the movie investigating the strangeness of Patricia's claims and her subsequent disappearance, explained away by her involvement with the radicals. But he's a faithful Jungian and convinced that all her fantastical claims of witches and magic can be explained through rational analysis. There's a cutting, brutal answer to his quest late in the film. But in the meantime, Susie's star quickly rises at the school, attracting the attention of Madame Blanc and the staff, and she is groomed as a tool of ambiguous occult ends. Blanc imbues her hands and feet with some unexplained glowing energy and has her dance the lead in a piece the group has been working on. As she goes through the violent, ecstatic movements, choreographed with unsettling intensity by Damien Jallet, in another room, The body of fellow student Olga, Elena Fokina, who has lost favor with the instructors, is twisted and warped in bone-breaking agony, chained to Susie's movements like a rag doll. It's an unbearably gruesome, violent sequence. Susie's ravishing choreography intercut with Olga's screams, set to Tom York's thrumming score. Some may not make it through that sequence. Those who do will see the follow-up meeting between Blanc and Susie, in which they inexplicably nibble on chicken wings, and Susie, still oblivious to the torture she enabled, says the dance felt like what it must feel like to fuck. It's a crazy line, and jarringly out of place in what is an almost entirely sexless film. There is no lust in Suspiria, so often an easy chaser for violence in the horror genre. The Berlin winter is cold and bloodless. The bodies of the dancers are not objectified for our titillation, never lovingly panned over in bloody death. They are terrifying houses of horror, and only get more terrifying as Susie goes deeper down the Coven's rabbit hole. Here's where I anticipate Guadagnino might get accused of making an anti-woman film, of presenting the dancers and witches' bodies and their collective energy as something to be dreaded and cursed. But what is the alternative in the world of the film? Madame Blanc has the dancers prepare a performance of a piece entitled Volk, which she originally choreographed in the aftermath of World War II. When Susie, weary of its demanding leaps, suggests an alteration to it, Blanc bears down on her, livid, assuring her there's no way for her to understand the place and time and devastation it was born out of. She then has Susie run through the jumps over and over again in a movement whose exhausting repetition starts to resemble a kind of warding off spell, an insistent fight against gravity. Dance, an extension and tool of the Coven's witchcraft, is a fortress against the other evils of the world. That doesn't mean that everything within its walls is pretty or peaceable or good. And Susie's path is not a hero's journey. She's not there to anything so patriarchal as conquer an enemy or find herself. Guadagnino's vision does not allow for anything so seductive or comforting as that. Suspiria is a gorgeous, hideous, uncompromising film, and while it seeks to do many things, settling our minds about the brutality of the past and human nature is not one of them. Dario Argento's Suspiria from 1977 is one of my absolute favorite horror films of all time. I would easily rank it inside my top 10 horror movies. I find the cinematography to be inspiring and its atmosphere chilling. I truly love the film. So to say that this remake had to live up to high expectations for me is completely accurate. I won't deny that. From the trailers, though, I was extremely excited to see how this remake was going to turn out because it seemed to be using a very 1970s filmmaking aesthetic in its advertising while not completely copying Argento's vibrant color scheme from the original. Now, after seeing it, I can honestly say that, in some ways, Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria remake surpasses the original. However, as a whole, it isn't quite as strong. What do I mean by that? Well, read on. Susie Bannion is a young ballerina who travels from America to Berlin so she may study dancing at the Marcos Tanz Company, a world-renowned school under the tutelage of Madame Blanc. Susie Bannion is a young ballerina who travels from America to Berlin so she may study dancing at the Marcos Tanz Company, a world-renowned school under the tutelage of Madame Blanc. The plot, more or less following the same premise as the original, Susie Bannion is a young ballerina who travels from America to Berlin so she may study dancing at the Marcos Tanz Company, a world-renowned school under the tutelage of Madame Blanc. At first, it seems to be a dream come true for Susie, that is, until strange things start happening with all of the students. Mysterious disappearances and disturbing accidents plague this school, all while Madame Blanc and her staff seem to be holding some sort of dark secret as these hauntings among the young girls rain terror. A coven of witches runs this dance school. The positives, for most of this movie, I really was with it. The story, while fairly similar to the original, felt its own. It took a similar plot while creating its own story out of it. In case you are unaware of this premise, it is about a coven of witches running this dance school. Yes, a lot of things remain the same while still taking a slightly different approach or making a turn that isn't quite the same. I really appreciated that about this film. It showed respect for its source material and other Argento productions without retreading what has already been done before. From its story to its scares and cinematography even, it all looks and feels like a film straight out of the 1970s, but it doesn't feel like a carbon copy of Argento's masterpiece. While there were plot points that are applied from the '77 film, the remake still accomplished being relatively unpredictable as to exactly where it was going, which kept me guessing. The story structure itself is actually probably more solid than the original, if I'm being perfectly honest. I love the original, every single frame of it, but the story can come across as a bit of a mess as it does go from one thing to the next rather radically at times. What holds it all together cohesively is its superb camera work and lighting, as well as its terrifying scares and atmosphere. With the remake, it seems to have found a better balance of story and style for the most part. The cinematography and editing are expertly crafted and added to the film's identity in a great way. There is a disparate take on the body horror element as well. Argento's film certainly maintained a brutal form of violence, and so does this one, but in a creative and original way all on its own. There is one scene in the remake that I would say is more disturbing and cringe-inducing than what was seen in the original. This particular scene involves one of the young students upset after an argument she had with Madame Blanc during a class, in which a spell of some sort is cast on her to make her body deform and twist to literally collapse upon itself. It was a very long sequence that was horrifying to watch, as every bone shattered and organs ruptured within her distorting body, all of this without showing even a drop of blood, which only made it more intense. I couldn't look away, yet the entire time I kind of wanted to shut my eyes to how cruel it got. That may sound like a negative, but I actually mean that positively, because it created so much tension and fear for what these witches could do. This whole sequence was actually stylishly spliced in with a dance sequence, which turned into a bit of a motif that this film took on. Every dance practice, recital, or show also always included a spine-chilling scene to be interwoven with, and I found it to be brilliant. Especially with the fantastic effects work that went into the film, there is not a single mediocre special effect in the flick. They are all completely convincing and sometimes terrifying. Well, that is with the exception of one particular makeup effect, which I will touch on later. Dario Argento's dazzling 1977 chiller Suspiria first opened in the UK in a censoriously truncated version, having suffered significant cuts to blunt its extremities. Horror fans were appalled and sought out more complete versions of the film, videotapes of which were promptly confiscated during the video nasties hysteria of the early '80s. How things have changed. Today, Luca Guadagnino's grandiose Suspiria remake can sail into British cinemas with all its bone-cracking, skin-slicing, bloodletting intact, a cause for rejoicing, no doubt. Yet watching this sporadically sparkling yet weirdly saggy cover version of Argento's biggest international hit, I couldn't help wishing that someone had been there with the scissors to trim the film of its indulgences. Not the violence, but the verbosity. Set in divided Berlin and comprising 6 acts and an epilogue, Guadagnino's film takes the premise of Argento and Daria Nicolodi's original script, which itself drew inspiration from sources as diverse as Thomas de Quincey and Snow White. Dakota Johnson is Susie, the American who joins the prestigious Helena Marcos dance company, within whose enclave she uncovers witchy secrets. There's more in that building than what you can see, says Chloe Grace Moretz's rattled student Patricia, unburdening her soul to her aging psychotherapist who thinks she's suffering from paranoid delusions. When Patricia goes missing, chain-smoking choreographer Madame Blanc, Tilda Swinton, suggests she has left the company because of her own political beliefs and agendas. Meanwhile, murmurings of earthly power struggles mingle with whispers about a triumvirate of mythical mothers, sighs, darkness, and tears, whose shadows haunt the academy. As the Mennonite-raised Susie impresses Blanc with her unique blend of innocence and strength, so she rises to the top of the troupe, playing the protagonist in the provocative Volk dance, which has become their sinister signature piece. While Argento's dreamy fantasia possessed an abstract, timeless quality, albeit with subtle allusions to Germany's guilty past, Guadagnino and a bigger splash screenwriter David Kajganich focus, or maybe fixate, upon the socio-political specifics of their 1977 setting. News reports of the Baader-Meinhof group and discussions of the legacy of Nazism are constantly to the fore, alongside declarative statements about the changing role of women in modern society and the indomitable power of motherhood. It sounds intriguing, and at times it is, yet too often the result is clunkily mechanical, tending occasionally toward the risible. Whereas Argento relied on the power of cinema to tell his story, bold colors, expressionist camera angles, and that unforgettable Goblin score, Guadagnino insists on spoon-feeding us extraneous exposition, undercutting the creepy atmosphere while obfuscating a narrative overstuffed with diversions and distractions. On the performance front, Dakota Johnson cuts an impressive figure, rising to the choreographed challenges of her role with the same gusto that Natalie Portman brought to Black Swan, another auteurist hit that is indebted to Argento. Mia Goth, too, is reliably spiky as fellow dancer Sarah, while original star Jessica Harper has a cameo supporting role. As for Tilda Swinton, she plays 3 roles, one of which sees her essentially doing an impression of Max von Sydow's father Marin from The Exorcist, buried under layers of aging makeup. Cinematographer Sayombu Mukdipram lends a certain panache to proceedings, reveling in nostalgic glides and crash zooms as his cameras move amid the mirrored surfaces and pentagonal lines of Inbal Weinberg's sharp production design. The color palette may occasionally be muted, but there's an overwrought energy that matches the earnest angst of the narrative, complemented by the mournful strains of Tom York's music. Somewhere in the middle of it all, there is a decent 90-minute dance-driven art house shocker struggling to get out. At times I was reminded of Gaspar Noé's hyperventilating Climax, an unhinged movie that functioned on an almost entirely experiential level. In his definitive book, Dario Argento, The Man, the Myth, and the Magic, writer Alan Jones quotes Argento as calling his original Suspiria an escalating experimental nightmare, a real magical acid trip. More recently, Guillermo del Toro hailed Argento's masterpiece as a work of pure madness and cinematic joy. It's that sense of joy that is missing from Guadagnino's version. For all its OTT elements, which include riffs lifted from Argento's 1980 Inferno, this Suspiria remains peculiarly dour, weighed down by the gravity of its own strange self-importance, like a dancer unwilling or unable to simply leap into the air and fly. The story and the way the Caven casts their spells, it seems the dance style is aggressive, shocking. It feels like we're watching a martial arts combat to the point that moves feel and sound more like blows. Here's also where I managed to shed a bias that I had for Dakota Johnson's acting skills. She does a lot of her own dancing in the movie. There is a professional dancer doubling for her on some scenes, but when she needs to dance, she is convincing enough for the role. The end result is a reinterpretation of a classic that has its own tone, and the style of horror is more corporeal, more visceral, and surprisingly sparse. Nino saves most of the gore from one climatic scene. The payback becomes anticlimactic, because unlike Argento's original ending, Cut, Guadagnino commits the ultimate sin of wrapping up some loose threads with an epilogue and a dialogue full of exposition for the sake of one character. I couldn't manage to care enough about the third lead, Dr. Joseph Clare, a.k.a. Lutz Ebersdorf, a.k.a. Tilda Swinton, because of all the makeup I didn't recognize. Swinton underneath the layers of the disguise, but I can recognize a person with a ton of makeup on. Swinton does a great performance as Madame Blanc. Her other 2 roles in this film were not as memorable, or perhaps they were memorable for the wrong reasons. And yes, she has a third role that I can't tell you about because it's a major spoiler. The movie announces itself as 6 acts and an epilogue. I don't think all acts work in capturing the audience's attention. There's a long low in there. The initial shots contain some interesting camera work, but nothing resembling the vivid sets and crazy shots of the original. There seems to be an overabundance of characters, but surprisingly, not a lot of stories to tell, although a lot are hinted. Some real-world scenarios are in the background, including a possible terrorist subplot that gets lost. Somewhere, then, there's a story about the Dr. Joseph Clare's wife, Anka's disappearance, which only has one thing going for it. Anka is played by Jessica Harper, the lead actress who played Susie Bannion in the original film. The new Sister Spio works on a different spectrum than the original, and the results are mixed. It's not the same film. This version avoids the extremes from the original to the point of ignoring some lessons in horror filmmaking. That is to say, the movie does go on a bit too long after delivering one horrific scene. The movie promises more horrors, but waits a little too long in the delivery. I'm all for a slow burn, but the candle seems go out after a while. The movie seems to make it up for all the waiting with the climatic scene, but when it doesn't end there and we literally see the aftermath, it does feel like a concert movie where the director has decided to include the stage being disassembled at the end as part of the film, recommended with a lot of reservations. It's flawed, but it's not bad. Don't expect Argento's masterpiece here. That would be an unfair comparison. Either way, there's some quality at its core, but some aspects really needed not to be included in a movie that feels longer than it is. Guadagnino does succeed in making a film that feels like an inspired but not copycat creation from the same source. I'm not sure I can recommend it to a fan of the original, since it embraces much of what Argento was avoiding. The result might be a mixed bag, but still one you might want to sample. Director Luca Guadagnino may have been the wrong guy to tackle the remake of Dario Argento's horror classic Suspiria. Guadagnino, who last year gave us the wonderful Call Me By Your Name, leans heavily into the arty elements of the source material. With inconsistent results, this artistic approach yields some interesting images and sequences, including one of the most repulsive kill scenes I've ever watched. But as a whole, the film is a failure. The narrative has a young American dancer named Susie Banyan, a very good Dakota Johnson, traveling to Berlin in the 1970s to join a dance school run by Madame Blanc, Tilda Swinton. The school is really a front for a coven of witches. The naive SU might be part of some kind of master plan. She's escaped a puritanical religious household in America to follow her dream of dance in Europe, and when she does perform, she instantly captures the imagination of the head mistress, Madame Blanc. Their connection is instantly intriguing and perhaps even sexual. However, this element is only teased. Meanwhile, Patricia Chloe Grace Moritz, one of the school's former dancers, is being treated by Dr. Joseph Clare, also played by Swinton, in heavy costume and makeup for what might be a delusion disorder. But Dr. Kleemer isn't so sure that Patricia's delusions are all just in her head. She drops in and out of the story as if she's a spirit. It's frustrating. The 1977 original Suspiria was an odd one, featuring strange overdubbing, a heavy synth score, a laughably but potent bad puppet bat, attack creepy characters, an attic crawling with maggots, and sumptuous, vivid production design. That film has a terribly dated ending, but one that made some sense. Guadagnino's version, by contrast, is an indecipherable rewrite by David Kenck, who's next writing The Noon, Pet Sematary. The bloody conclusion is ludicrous. What really pains me about Guadagnino's version is that it just isn't scary. Regardless whether Argento's now cheesy and dated effects pull you out of the narrative, there are terrifying moments in his film, and the strange sound design that may have been an accident given the dubbing involved gave the entire production an otherworldly feeling. While Guadagnino gets the bizarre facets down, he isn't really able to make them frightful. An example is that in the original film, there was a killer on the loose, as I remember it. The first kill scene is really terrifying, and it puts the viewer on edge, instant tension as a young woman is slashed and falls to her death. That story thread has been pulled from this remake in favor of more supernatural themes and political ones. Without much explanation, Kin's screenplay mixes in a terrorism subplot that has only tangential importance. It's almost a Hitchcock and MacGuffin. However, since this subplot is given constant prominence, it makes the fatal error of running afoul of Anton Kov's famous advice. If in the first act you have hung a pistol on the wall, then in the following one it should be fired. Otherwise, don't put it there. I'm not saying that Guadagnino needed to wind things up with a terrorist bomb going off, but the terrorism aspects he does include only act to distract and are one of the exasperating threads left hanging. Swinton plays 3 characters in the movie. I'm not sure why this was really necessary, because we know that she's playing Dr. Clare. The whole thing seems like some kind of elaborate gag, and it doesn't even connect. The characters aren't somehow linked in the overall story. I can't imagine that casting one actor and then going through the substantial effort to hide her under mounds of makeup and prosthetics made sense in the budget, either my thought was that casting someone like Jeremy Irons would have been a far better fit. For Clemmer, I'm sure that I'm missing something, but I just didn't get it. And I don't think that Guadagnino gets why the original Suspiria worked in the first place. It was at its heart an arty film, but also one that was a part of a horror thriller genre that Argento had helped to pioneer. He was a prominent contributor to Gallo cinema, but aside from the title, the dance school character names, and the Coven of Witches, Guadagnino, working from Kenna's way to busy script, ignores the genre. Foundations that made the original so important, but also so much fun this new Suspiria might be lured, but it is an exploitive which was integral back in 1977. Notably missing from this film is any real sexuality, which, given the setup, seemed to be a logical element. Perhaps given the current climate, avoiding more overt sexual themes is understandable. But this is a remake of a Dario Argento film. One would think that sex would have played a more prominent role instead. There's politics and witchcraft, and ultimately, as socially aware as Guadagnino wants his film to be, it just comes off as laughably self-important. Trying to explain or describe the movie would produce a room full of eye rollers. The production design here is a real downer. Surprising is that the 1977 film looks far better. Argento's rich use of colors, particularly red, and his meticulous attention to detail is one of the film's lasting high points. Guadagnino working with his Call Me By Your Name cinematographer. MTI Prom gives us a drab and really ugly-looking collection of images. By the time the story reaches its action-packed conclusion, the visuals are impossibly smear-y and dull with blood-looking brownish. Although flowing in fountains, it's suitably distasteful, but impossible to admire, and the action is delivered in blurry slow motion that has little impact other than to further frustrate the viewer. More detail, Luca Guadagnino. Suspiria 2018 is a lot of film. His remake of Dario Argento's iconic 1970s horror is around 2.5 hours long. The original clocks in at nearer 100 minutes. Its runtime is densely packed with atmosphere, artistic cinematography, and outrageous horror sequences. The bones of the plot are similar enough to the original dancer Sue Dakota Johnson moves to Europe to attend a prestigious ballet school. She arrives to find the atmosphere at the school disturbed. A student has gone missing. Having left during the night, the coven of witches that run the school are immediately struck by Susie and have led instructor Madame Blanc, Tilda Swinton, begin preparations for Susie to participate in a ritual. The thing with this new Suspiria is that there's so much to it gets broken down into 16,000 acts, okay? 6 and an epilogue. It's a film that sits with you for days afterwards. It does feel long, but it also feels full. Guadagnino and screenwriter David Kenck have relocated the dance school to Berlin, but retain the 1977 setting of Sue, and with the wall dividing Berlin more than a decade from falling, allows the film to draw parallels with the modern political climate. Tense border crossings and oblique dividing wall both feature. The political references don't stop there either, as the film also has the Me Too movement in its blood. Particularly in a pair of brutally loaded lines of dialogue, it gives you material to engage with then, but as an audiovisual experience, it's hypnotic. It's in a series of nightmarish montages that Suspiria 2018 delivers its most effective moments. These bizarre visual collages, set to Tom York's wonderful tension-winding score, become increasingly intense, eventually reaching a level that can be overwhelming. The film climaxes with a sequence that is visually and orally spectacular. It's vulgar and disturbing. The film lands on a visceral level, and it's in this way that it really feels like it captures some of the spirit of Argento's original. Fans of the original Suso will likely have noted from the promotional materials that Guadagnino's remake does not feature the same vibrant coloring. Indeed, this new take uses a more faded palette with lots of worn-out orange and green. However, it turns out that Guadagnino and cinematographer Samba MTI Prom have no less of an eye for beautiful photography, because goodness me, Suspiria 2018 is a gorgeous film to look at. Set against the gray German landscapes, the school is a grand-looking location, and its large empty halls and mirror line studios make a wonderful disorienting backdrop for this treacherous witchcraft horror. Then there's the melodrama, another element of the original that is present in the remake moments of melodrama. and even some silliness here. Only add to the disorientating feel Guadagnino achieves Suspiria. 2018 is a work of precision. Even the performances feel exactly measured. The two central turns are both excellent but notably restrained. Tilda Swinton's Madame Blanc is a poised matriarch, and Dakota Johnson's Susie overwhelmed and Aru, while the two share a quiet, compelling chemistry elsewhere. The rambunctious Coven of Witches provides a more anarchic presence, and Evag Goth is brilliant as the rebellious Chainsome smoking Sarah, while there's all that and more to praise in Susp. 2018, the film is pocked with flaws. There's some unconvincing CGI, a few slow dialogue sequences that pop up when the runtime is already past punishing, and a couple of interesting ideas that simply don't work when rendered visually, such as the dance sequence with Sui and Olga. It really is an indulgent film, and we wonder whether a little more restraint in the scripting stage might have been worthwhile. 2018 has been a year of incredible genre movies. The Shape of Water, A Quiet Place, and Hereditary Suspiria 2018 stands just shy of them. There is just much to it, and of it, at one point, we swear they ran out of Suspiria, 1977 to remake, and so just started redoing bits of Mother of Tear. We hope Luca Guadagnino remakes Inferno next, and that it's 6.5 hours long. The notion of remaking Dario Argento's 1977 masterpiece Suspiria seems perverse. The original has only the skimpiest of storylines and is remembered for its overwhelming style. It's a prog rock symphony of horrors with vibrant color effects and pounding music, but its script is less sophisticated than the throwaway 1973 TV movie Satan's School for Girls, which has more or less the same plot. Argento's Suspiria is not only matchless as most up for a Doover cult. Horrors are but unapproachable. In the cycle of remakes, only Gus Van Sanyo seems as demented an endeavor as Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria, which is perhaps the most admirable thing about it, wisely. Guadagnino doesn't even try to imitate Argento. He sets the story in the year the original film came out, but plays up the politics of the time, shifting the setting from a city in the Black Forest haunted by medieval alchemy to drab gray. Divided Berlin Argento Susie Jessica Harper, who has a cameo here, arrived in a fairy tale storm with expressionist flat flashes of lightning, but Guadagnino sue it. Dakota Johnson just trudges through unending drizzle. Argento cast Joan, Bennett, and Alita Valley icons of Hollywood and Europe as witchy dance mistresses, whereas Guadagnino packs his Coven with striking posing figures from the back catalogs of Derek Jarman, Rare, Werner Fassbender, and Paul Verhoeven. Tilda Swinton, Angela Winkler, Ingrid, Caven, and Renee Sendik. It doesn't all work fresh. From Call Me By Your Name, which Dario Argento should now remake with 20-minute knife murder scenes, Guadagnino either doesn't know how to build suspense or has no interest in such. Petty commercial concerns, wedges of exposition, and editorial comment take up whole scenes, then disturbing, amusing glimpses of weird sisterly activity. This is an all-female film. Even the male lead is a woman. Bleed into outrageous horror set pieces that break into narrative the way song and dance numbers do in a musical. In fact, the major horror sequences are intercut with or grow out of avant-garde performance pieces. Guadagnino and screenwriter David Kenck hit most of the story beats of the original, but with different emphasis and some trickiness. Involving Johnson's character, there are reasons why Sui is a blank, and Madame Blanc, Swinton's sinister dance director, isn't an out-and-out villain, but it takes so long to spell them out that few will stay involved enough in the thin story to care about the quite clever sting in the finale. Extra information to do a remake of the 1977 classic Suspiria one would have to do a remake that is completely brazen and bold considering how crazy the original is. Director Luca Guadagnino manages to replicate Argento's phantasmagory by doing just that without making his interpretation feel like a direct copy. Suspiria still has the same premise and the same name of the protagonist, Sui Banyan, but it manages to feel like its own creation. Although I still can't quite figure out what to make of this version, I still admired its ambition, even though it admittedly made me nauseous during its blood-drenched climax. As previously mentioned, the story remains similar to the original American ballet dancer Susie Banyan. Dakota Johnson moves to Berlin to join a famed dance company run by a coven of witches once Susie lands the lead role in an upcoming piece and becomes tutored by Madame Blanc, Tilda Swinton. She becomes a part of a sinister plot. However, Susie's fellow dancer Sarah M. Goth ends up being the one uncovering that mystery behind that plot, and the disappearance of a dancer who fled the company named Patricia Chloe Grace. Moritz, despite Susie being our main character, Sarah ends up being the film's moral compass, and she is played expertly by Mia Goth, who is the acting MVP. Goth portrays Sarah with such naturalistic warmth and empathy that we're just praying that the worst doesn't happen to her. Tilda Swinton is terrific because she's Tilda Swinton, she's great in everything she does, and we even get a triple dosage of Tilda. Since she plays 3 roles also, Dakota Johnson brilliantly plays the suspiciously detached Susie. However, it's Mia Goth who steals the show. Of course, it's hard to talk about a Luca Guadagnino film without talking about the way it's shot. After capturing the utopian feel of the sunny Italian setting of Call Me By Your Name, both he and cinematographer Sambu, MTI Prom brilliantly capture a deceitful underworld that is both drained of color above the surface and drenched in shadow, in the hidden places where the witches keep their dark secrets. The witches hide their secrets from their dancers. However, the fact they're witches isn't hidden for the viewers allows the supernatural storyline to be pretty grounded in realism when they're discussing their plans for the coven. They do so in a nonchalant manner rather than engage in discussion while reading from a spell book or using another form of cliché. The witches talk about their plan schemes while drinking coffee, which is a simplistic technique makes them appear more normal than they are. Along with the moody score by Tom York, the acting, the cinematography, and the realistic depiction of the supernatural are the highlights of the movie. Everything else doesn't exactly fall flat, but still puts this film in the middle. For instance, this movie is way too long. It's about 2 hours and 30 minutes long, but probably should have been about 30 minutes shorter. Also, it is uncertain as to how the historical events which the film depicts tie into the storyline. It's easily one of those movies that requires more than one viewing to dig a little deeper into what the film is attempting to convey. Whether I will go back and rewatch it anytime soon remains to be seen because, again, the length was a slight problem for me, but to anyone who watches it for the first time, just know that it is quite meditative, and it does get gruesome at times, if those aren't huge issues. Then I'd recommend seeing it for yourself to try and see what you get out of the experience. Luca Guadagnino is the perfect filmmaker to translate the Italian giallo subgenre from modern times. Gio earned its name from the yellow covers of exploitative paperbacks, typically about detectives investigating a string of ghastly murders on film. Italian filmmakers such as Mario Bava and Lucio Se blended the novelistic conventions of giallo with horror, associating the phenomenon more with stylistic qualities than story tropes. A typical giallo film of its heyday during the 1960s and 1970s embraced style over substance, using bold colors and shocking imagery in place of cohesive plotting to incite a physical reaction when watching a giallo film an audience cannot help but interact with, assault of jolts turn away in revulsion and simply feel throughout, despite the film's lack of plot. Among the best of these films was Dario Argento's Suspiria from 1977 about an American dancer played by Jessica Harper who discovers her German ballet school is run by witches. The remake of Suspiria concentrates Guadagnino's sensuousness, along with his effusive ability to evoke sensations beyond the visual and oral limitations of cinema into a superb new vision. In his films, Guadagnino taps into our senses of smell, taste, and touch, in addition to the more traditional sensory modes of cinema that engage our eyes and ears. I Am Love 2010 finds Tilda Swinton playing a woman who has been repressed by her husband's domineering family, and after experiencing exquisite-looking food and a sexual awakening, she reclaims some measure of her identity in a bigger. Splash 2016 Swinton appears as a rocker whose vocal cords have been clipped, and while healing at a hot Mediterranean getaway, she relies more on senses of touch and taste. Last year's Call Me By Your Name, Guadagnino's most widely admired work, engages in physical sensations that have equal bearing on our emotions, as echoed by Michael Starr's aching hearts and body speech. In each case, the director shoots sensory experiences in a way that captivates his audience, creating phantom impressions that involve and immerse us. And in addition to the Epicurean, The director also layers his films with rich political, cultural, and emotional textuality. He engages the intellect and the body in equal measure, leaving the audience to deconstruct the many layers of their experience making Suspiria. Guadagnino uses his talent for activating our senses in the service of horror, a genre that more than any other depends on its ability to trigger physiological reactions. They make us experience anxiety and fear, resulting in an involuntarily elevated heart rate. Sweaty palms, shivers down the spine, and jolting muscles when his protagonist in the new Suspiria, young Ohio-born Mennonite Susie Banyan Dakota Johnson arrives in Berlin at a prestigious dance academy. She demonstrates her ability to perform the lead part in a ballet for the choreographer Madame Blanc Swinton. At the same time, Olga Elena Fack, who has insulted the Academy faculty of witches, finds herself trapped in a rehearsal room as Susie performs an intense and impassioned dance. Olga, unknowingly controlled by Susie's movements thanks to Madame Blanc spell, experiences appalling torture as her body is thrown about the room, contorted and cracked until it's nothing but a twisted hunk of warped flesh, drooling and bleeding. It's a scene that sends the audience into a burst of reflexive physical reactions. We squirm in our seats, gasp, and feel sick to our stomachs. Guadagnino uses the dance academy and its inhabitants for more than horror responses. However, there are overt sexuality and physicality in the modern choreography, an aspect that Argento's original barely explored. Speaking of her dancing, Susie admits, "I feel like what it must feel like to..." Madame Blanc inquires, "You mean a man?" Susie answers no, and then explains, "I was thinking of an animal." The director adopts the position of his witch-run dance academy by brilliantly perverting dance into something beyond a physical, artistic expression. The school's instructors are members of an ancient Hickson that worships three devilish icons, Mother Tenerum, Mother Lom, and Mother Suspiriorum, based on Argento 3. Mother's trilogy that began with Suspiria and continued to the Lesser Inferno, 1980, and the Mother of Tears, 2007, alongside Miss Tanner Angela Winkler and a host of others. Madame Blanc votes to elect leadership between two candidates, herself and the scene Mother Marcos, who has maintained power since before the Nazis ruled Germany. The leader selects dancers who will sustain the dance troupe, of course, but also those who could develop the coven, young women whose dancing transcends mere movement, and the latest student with potential. And she arrives not long after the disappearance of another young student, Patricia Chloe Grace Moritz, who the coven had selected as Marco's future host. In the first scenes, Patricia visits. Dr. Klemmer, played by Swinton under convincing prosthetics. Klemmer is no doubt named after the real-life German scholar Victor Klemmer, 1881 to 1960, whose detailed journals provide an account of his country's transitions from an empire to the Weimar Republic and then to a fascist dictatorship ruled by Adolf Hitler. He's a somewhat peripheral character to Sayé's plot, but he's essential to its themes. Having lost his wife Harper, appearing briefly during World War II, he's well aware of how well the German people can convince themselves of perceived threats and how the real threat is often right in front of them. He meets Patricia's claims that witches run her dance school with an understandable degree of Jungian rationalization, but he begins to suspect that Patricia was right when another student, Sarah M. Goth, confirmed Patricia's story. Cespan 2018-4, Most Significant Lie. The film is set during the so-called German Autumn of 1977, amidst violent demonstrations in West Berlin by the Red Army factions, guerrilla campaign, the RAF, batter Mannhof Group members of a culture riddled with guilt over the atrocities of World War II and trying to heal, rallied for change, stressing how the people running their government were the same people in charge. During the Nazi era, they responded as revolutionaries do, with destabilizing violence in the form of bombings, kidnappings, robberies, and assassinations. 1977 was the faction's most violent year, but it also marked their demise. Ora Mannhof was hanged in her prison cell the year before, while Andreas Bader carried out a suicide pact alongside two fellow leaders, Guadagnino and his screenwriter David Kenck, whom he collaborated with on A Bigger Splash, used the political backdrop to underscore themes of old regimes and new present in Syria. In Nazi Germany, Hitler described the German nation using the term Volke, meaning the people denoting his party's nationalistic political ideology rooted in Nordic superiority. Vogue is also the name of Mother Marco's famous ballet, which Madame Blanc hopes to revitalize and refashion with the help of Susie, her prized new student. Perhaps Madame Blanc is a symbol of modern Germany, trying to bring her Coven into a new era, while Mother Marcos and the allusions to her betrayal of the sanctity of the original. Three Mothers represents the plague of fascism that festers in Germany's past, if the precise ambitions and political dynamics of the Coven remain somewhat elusive. They're at least portrayed with entrancing and reviling imagery. Consider the sequence where several witches deal with some nosy policemen alerted by Klemer by casting a spell that leaves them catatonic. It's a temporary hex that allows the witches to brainwash and defuse the detectives, but not before they have their fun. They use daggers that resemble meat hooks to poke at the officer's genitalia, all the while laughing hysterically in a scene that causes bemused repulsion in the viewer elsewhere. Guadagnino makes connections between Susie and Madame Blanc, such as how their flat waves of hair often appear in the same style sometimes, braided, sometimes parted in the middle, and draped down their back. And the austere flashbacks to Ohio show that Sui has come from a constrained world, and so she has fully embraced the liberation of her body and soul at the Academy. No matter the cost, Suspiria's status as a remake will undoubtedly result in comparisons to Argento's original, whereas the original version sustained itself with primary colored floodlights, especially red, and the persistent goblin score. Guadagnino's version is a different experience. Altogether, his color palette is muted to reflect the diautumnal setting. The presentation has a flesh-like quality, adopting skin tones that frequently tear into blood. Reds, its visual design is a layer of epidermis that is occasionally torn to crimson shreds, either by the copious amounts of blood in the finale, or by the stringy costumes worn by dancers in their performance of Vogue, featuring choreography that moves each performer in unison, mirroring their secret bonds like a flock of conspirators. Cinematographer Simu MTI, Prom gives the image visible grain, and in a nod to the 1970s setting, employs a number of long zooms fashionable during the period. And while Goblin's music gave the 1977 version a spellbinding momentum, the score by Radiohead's lead singer Tom York lends Guadagnino's remake a melancholy and ruminative atmosphere. Enhanced by the film's imposing 2.5-hour runtime, the structure, meanwhile, breaks up the length into 6 chapters, each preceded with a cryptic name, as well as a prologue and epilogue. Cespan 2018-2. If there's a misstep in Guadagnino's approach, it occurs at the bloody climax, a sequence that begins with uncanny terror. Mother Marcos Swinton, again a naked heap of misshapen growths, rogue baby hands, and twisted orifices behind a pair of sunglasses, awaits her resurrection in Sue's body. But Sui is one of the original 3 mothers incarnate, having returned to expel Marcos and her followers. She's also a symbol of Germany purging itself of Nazism. What unfolds is a shocking, gloriously gory mess of convulsive dancing and head-exploding viscera, although Guadagnino shoots the initial part of the ritual with appropriate ceremonial magnificence in full embrace of its sacred and unsettling qualities. He unfortunately snaps you out of your immersion all at once, a shaky distancing. Slow motion accompanied by a limp Tom York song on the soundtrack draws the viewer out of the otherwise sublimely heightened moment in a way it recalls the D-Day sequence from Saving Private Ryan 1998, wherein Steven Spielberg assaulted his audience with their depiction of the Normandy landings, during which he slows things down, whereas Spielberg allowed the viewer to catch their breath and gain perspective. Guadagnino's use of the same transition in Suspiria serves only to soften the sheer horror of this otherwise monumental scene then again. Given the symbolism of the climax, perhaps the somber tone is appropriate. A certain type of viewer may watch Guadagnino's Suspiria and feel bored by its lack of jump scares, dejected by its drab setting, appalled by its hellish climax, and utterly confused by what any of it's supposed to mean. Conventional horror audiences, or those inclined toward the primal and surface-level pleasures of giallo, may feel isolated by the filmmaker's more poetic treatment and layered historical texts, and how the plot reverberates them through metaphor. requiring the viewer's foreknowledge of Germany's history, but Sup remains a symphony of intellectualized characters, unforgettable imagery, and a volley of sensual horrors and pleasures epic in the same way The Shining is. The film belongs among the pantheon of great horror remakes, placing Guadagnino's name, alongside those responsible for other superior remakes, including David Cronenberg, John Carpenter, and Philip Kaufman, but Suspiria nonetheless has more on its mind than horror and its physical connection to the human body. The sad final shots bear the weight of Germany's complex history of atrocity, memory, and rebirth, and what lingers is a profound feeling of sorrow that demands contemplation. This film directed by Luca. Guadagnino, screenplay by David Kajganich, produced by Marco Morabito, Bradley J. Furr.
Luca Guadagnino, David Kajganich, Silvia Venturin, Andy Francesco, Melzi, Darla.
William Sherrick, Gabrielle Morat, starring Dakota Johnson, Tilda Swinton, Migu Angela, Winkler, Ingrid, Caven, Helena, Felina, Silvi, Tested, Renee Sendik, Christine, Laut, Faya, Suchai, Mello, Abella, Jessica Harper, Chloe Grace Moritz, Cinematography, Sambu, MTI. Prom, edited by Walter Fano, music by Tom York, production companies, K-Period Media, Frenesy Film Company, Video, Mythology Entertainment, First Sun Memo Films. Distributed by Amazon Studios, United States, v. Italy, release states. September 1st, 2018 in Venice, October 26, 2018 in United States, January 1st, 2019 in Italy, running time 152 minutes. Countries, Italy, United States, languages English, German, budget $20 million, box office $7.9 million. So guys, this is the review of Suspiria movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting, and if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.